Good morning and welcome into the show. It is Daniel Wortman coming to you live from the Dreamagine Sports Studios. It is 8 a.m. on the East Coast, 5 a.m. out west, and all time zones in between and around the world. Thank you and welcome into the show. We appreciate it, as always. A little bit later today, I'll be getting on a plane heading up to Nashville, Tennessee for the U.S. Soccer AGM. A lot of things going on up there, and I'll be curious to hear and speak with a bunch of the members as to their thoughts of where we are. Saturday is a time where the president traditionally gives their version of a State of the Union address within the National Council meeting. And I'll be curious to hear the comments from Carlos Cordero. He does not do a lot of press, and so it's a time that he never seems to be that comfortable with public speaking. And so it's not for everybody. I get it. But it will be interesting to hear his comments as well with everything going on, in light of, the lawsuits and some stuff we're going to get to here in just a few minutes after the break. In other news, the saga continues with Jurgen Klinsmann. So we talked about the last couple of days on the show, just the bizarre nature of the way Klinsmann just walked away from Hertha Berlin as the head coach. Well, let's just say that the Hertha Berlin supervisory board decided they didn't agree with Jurgen Klinsmann's assessment of the situation, nor his post-coaching plans to return to the supervisory board. Yesterday saw a turn of events that didn't go quite the way Klinsmann imagined. Jurgen Klinsmann not only left his role as head coach, but now will not return to his role on Hertha Berlin's supervisory board, with primary investor Lars Windhorst labeling the manner of his departure, quote, unacceptable. The U.S. head coach was made Hertha's interim coach in late November, less than a month after being appointed to the supervisory board by Windhorst, who wanted sporting expertise for a $224 million investment he made into the club. Following a turbulent 48 hours since Klinsmann announced his resignation on Facebook, Windhorst told a news conference on Thursday the former Bayern Munich boss would not return to the board. I regret that Jurgen Klinsmann left us abruptly. I talked to him on the phone and he apologized for it. He's very sorry. But sadly, the way he left, he won't be able to return to the supervisory board. The manner of his departure was unacceptable. The businessman added that he was sorry the club and Klinsmann could not agree on a long-term partnership. Also, because of the sponsors, he said, and later explained that Klinsmann also felt sorry for his knee-jerk reaction. He added, "You can do that as a teenager, but not in the business world." His name resounded internationally, and we were really close to landing new sponsors. On Wednesday, Klinsmann went live on Facebook and hinted at a power struggle with sporting executive Michael Preetz over the coach's responsibilities. Klinsmann wanted more power when he entered talks over a long-term future as the Hertha coach, and the sporting executive was not willing to hand it to him. He also said that he had not signed a contract in his 76 days at Hertha. On Thursday, Hertha president Werner Gegenbauer said that was not the case. We had an oral agreement since November 27th and a head coach contract since December 2nd. And Preetz, a former Bundesliga player, added that he had not experienced anything like this in his 34 years in the business. On the power struggle, he added there was a substantial disagreement over the responsibilities of a head coach. Klinsmann's approach, already in the past, when we loosely talked about him coaching Hertha, always was that he wants to decide everything. but there must always be someone who has the last word. At this club, those persons are the finance executive, Ingo Schiller, and me, and that's not negotiable. So there was obviously a definite power struggle here. Klinsmann, it appears to be that he just decided he didn't like the way things were going, was going to take his ball and go home, and decided I'll just go back to this other thing, and then and now he doesn't have that to go back to either. I don't know what all went down. I don't know what all the power struggles were. I don't know that it really matters. I think from the standpoint of Jurgen Klinsmann, probably wasn't the best way to handle the situation, at least from what I can tell. Quite an interesting few days. Jurgen Klinsmann realizing that maybe I didn't handle that quite so good. In other news, the stadium, Inter Miami, I don't know if we can even call them Inter Miami. They're in a lawsuit. Everything in American soccer is wrapped up in lawsuits, so I don't really know what's going on here, but it's quite funny. But there's some video shown of construction underway. They've got about a month left to get this stadium prepped and ready for opening day. It is a mad dash. I don't know if anyone down there is going to sleep to get it done. They're made a lot of progress. And I noticed that people on social media were kind of bashing Inter Miami in the stadium and calling it this name, calling it that name. I actually thought the stadium, from what I could see so far, looks pretty cool. It's a League One stadium, third division stadium. It's probably the nicest third division stadium we've got in America. I don't know what everybody's getting mad about. Miami's playing there temporarily, but I think their USL League One team's supposed to play there eventually, and if I'm a third division player in America, that's the stadium I want to play in as my home stadium. Come on. I'm kidding. I get the aggravation with the tear down of Lockhart Stadium, and I understand. Having grown up as a Red Sox fan, I understand the appreciation for tradition and, for old sports facilities. I would never want to see the Red Sox move out of Fenway Park, even though I get it is a funky, cramped stadium, and they've done wonders to try to bring it into the 21st century without disrespecting its history. I think the Fenway Sports Group has done a phenomenal job with that aspect there with the Red Sox. That process did not happen here for Lockhart. But you know what? It is what it is at this point. You can't go back. And what they're doing here is, to be a third division modular stadium to try to get it open and ready. I don't think it's. I've seen a lot worse. Let me put it that way. So I'm not going to bang on these guys for that, but I definitely think the USL League One team, if they play in that same stadium, and you're a third division player, that might be enough for you to just go I want to play for them, because that would be a really cool stadium. Really nice. If that was the stadium across this country in city after city, would it have the tradition and the history of a Fenway Park or the old Yankee Stadium, Wrigley Field? No. But I've seen a lot worse. So, I mean, I think it could be pretty cool. It looks pretty rad. And you know, like I said, if the third division team plays there, that's going to be really cool for them. So, look, there's a lot of things going on. Everything's winding up for the weekend in terms of, like, you know, getting ready to go for the U.S. Soccer AGM. A lot of meetings have already begun behind the scenes. The U.S. Soccer Board of Directors is one of those that does have things going on. On their meeting agenda, they're going to be going through a few different things. One is the president's report. They'll have their board committee reports and business updates. I don't know if this will be the very last board meeting for Jay Berhalter, but he will be providing a commercial update under his purview, his section of work there with the Federation. There will be discussions today on a new independent director that would come from a different background than soccer. They're looking at bringing someone in with a little bit of an NBA background. And then we'll also be looking for some updates on the vice presidential election process, the proposed bylaw and policy amendments, safe sport update, and some other U.S. Olympic Paralympic Committee governance and legislative updates, as well as some grievance updates. A follow-up item that is back on this board meeting agenda, which I think is interesting, is the West Virginia Soccer Association proposed policy 202-1 amendment. This had gone up in, I believe, December, and had gotten kind of kicked out, sent away. This is a revision to that. From my understanding and looking at it, it is a simplified version so that it's very clear as to what its intentions are and spells out exactly what it would do in conjunction with its corresponding bylaw. It'll be interesting to see what comes there. We will be watching on that also. So a lot going on at the board meeting that's going to kind of set up. This is the board meeting that usually takes place prior to the AGM. So the board meeting will come, and they will go through a bunch of stuff, and then this all takes place prior to the National Council meeting. It is not uncommon for the board of directors to do some things after the National Council meeting in another board meeting, because it's at that point they can do things that basically allows them a year to put policies in place without going through the National Council meeting. It is a procedural move. It's a workaround, basically, to get around the General Council. It's not always nefarious, but it can be used in a nefarious way. Last year, for example, NISA was not ready to go before the National Council meeting for a full-on approval vote. So what the board of directors did is they basically did not take up the issue prior to the National Council meeting in their board meeting. And so they went to the AGM National Council meeting without going through anything with NISA. Then they had a board meeting after that National Council meeting, which allowed the board of directors to give NISA provisional sanctioning as Division 3. They were not sanctioned as Division 3. They were provisionally sanctioned. It basically is kind of a temporary, if you want to think of it in a certain way. So that's what they got. They got provisional sanctioning, temporary, and that allowed them to get up and running for this year. And then this year, in the book of reports, one of the things that is on the agenda is the approval officially sanctioning as Division III the NISA league and project. So the board meetings are sometimes used like that. There are other times where they're trying to get some things implemented and working without the National Council approval, and then they're hoping that over time people just accept it. That has happened as well in the past, but hopefully we don't see any of that this year. I get why they did it with NISA last year, but this year not so much. Speaking of NISA, in the book of reports, you can actually read all their rules because they have to go up for approval. One of the things that they put in their rules is 4.4 prohibited and restricted items, and they go into some things here that has gotten some of the club's supporters up in arms. Generally, stadium rules must dictate what items are prohibited from being brought into the stadium, and the league office expects such rules to be enforced by all game personnel. Information about such prohibited items must be clearly communicated to the patrons. Items such as whistles, plastic horns, fireworks, flares, smoke bombs, or other safety hazards are strictly prohibited. Stadium security, ushers, and team staffs must make every reasonable effort to prevent these prohibited items from entering the facility. Any individual caught attempting to bring these items into the stadium or ignite them should be immediately expelled from the stadium. And when I saw this, I just started kind of laughing at first because this is a league that has kind of set itself up to be the home of independent clubs. And some of the best supporter culture in the world employs some of these items, and it creates such an incredible match day atmosphere. And we're just going to take away all of that independence and what I call beauty of the ambiance and environment, or at least threaten to. I thought it was absurd, and I don't know if that is a requirement from the federation, but I don't believe it is. I believe that is left up to the leagues. From everything I've ever read, I don't see anything anywhere where that is disallowed by the federation. That's a bizarre and, in my view, absurd rule for a league that's trying to posture itself as a league for independent clubs. So, we'll see how that goes and how that turns out. I have a feeling, a sneaky suspicion that Detroit City are going to ignore that rule. That's just me. I may be wrong, but, I doubt it. Our sponsor this half hour is Ductic Brand, DUKTIG brand.com. Go there, use promo code DWShow to get 10% off of your order. Last night I was in a coaches meeting, and we were there and going over some things as a group, as a collective, and one of the guys pulls out some of his Ductic Brand coaching cards. They look kind of like index cards, but they're soccer specific. Very, very good tools to use when taking notes. Maybe it's from a session, maybe it's tactics, maybe it's just some notes, but they're perfect to just keep in your pocket, pull out with a pen, and make some notes as well. So if you don't have some of those, go today to ducticbrand.com, use promo code DWShow, get 10% off of your order, and get it delivered right to your front door. You'll be happy you did. We'll be right back after this. plane heading to the Nashville AGM for U.S. Soccer, and looking forward to seeing some friends that I get to see usually about once a year in person, and so it's always a good time and great to see them. Hopefully learn of some news, some progress. Although much of what we hope for on this show in terms of reform and progress is off. It's why we work every day to make that happen. And yesterday was a big day in the world of American soccer. It was a day that saw some of its reach and effects reach members of Congress in Washington, D.C. And what I'm referring to is the statement released by the United States National Team Players Association. And that statement is a statement of support about the U.S. Women's National Team 2017 through 2021 CBA. And as I mentioned, it's already reached members of Congress. And I think there's a lot here to unpack, and we are going to try to do some of that right now on the show. But really big thing that happened yesterday. For the past 24 years, the United States National Soccer Team Players Association, the USNSTPA, that's a mouthful. They surely didn't pick a short name. The union that represents the United States men's national soccer team players has generally conducted its dealings with the U.S. Soccer Federation confidentially. The reason is simple. No matter how difficult and problematic those dealings have been, the players have eventually make deals with the Federation. That's why we rarely discuss CBA negotiations outside of our group. However, the Federation has been working very hard to sell a false narrative to the public and even to members of Congress. They have been using this false narrative as a weapon against current and former members of the United States women's national team. Other than releasing statements of support, we have appropriately left it to the U.S. women's national team players and their representatives to pursue their grievances. It is our view that despite the best efforts of U.S. women's national team players and their representatives, the Federation has had some success in convincing people of the Federation's false narrative. By coming forward to explain the situation, the USNSTPA hopes to create a better understanding and perhaps help bring about a resolution. So, this Players Association, representing the men's national team players, is doing a few things here right off the top. We're going to there's more. I mean, there's so much more here. But right off the top, the first thing that they are wanting to point out is the motivation. The reason why they feel like they need to go public is because the Federation has been spinning a false narrative. And this false narrative has, I mean, it is not changed under Carlos Cordero. He promised these players when he came into office that he was going to be for them and he was going to help them and he was going to be, a force for good and transparency, and he was an independent man and he was not going to do the things that every other president had been doing, and that he was going to stand up for them and blah, blah, blah. We've got more lawsuits under Carlos Cordero than any president so far. And this type of behavior has continued from U.S. Soccer. It's not changed. He has not changed the culture here in regards to the spin and the false narrative. The statements that they have said are simply untrue, and the U.S. US NSTPA is basically calling it out. And they're saying enough is enough. Let's tell the truth. Let's let the public in on something. There are a lot of things going on here that are not lining up with the story that the U.S. Soccer Federation has been spinning. This is why we need our soccer media in this country, the sports media in this country, to care like they care in other sports. If there was a scandal in the NFL, if there was a scandal in Major League Baseball, if there was a scandal in the NBA or the NHL, those sports reporters are like on it. They're getting into the weeds and they're telling the stories and they're going behind the scenes and they're shining a light and bringing to bear scrutiny. We don't get that in American soccer. There's very little pushback in American soccer media, in the establishment media, when it comes to these issues. And if you do say anything, you usually get muzzled. Why? Well, let's get to that. The U.S. Soccer Federation, like all U.S. national governing bodies for Olympic, Paralympic, or Pan American Games sports, has monopoly control over which athletes will be allowed to represent the United States. Historically, the Federation has used that monopoly power as a weapon against the players. For many years, they refused to pay players at all. The Federation benefited from ticket sales, sponsorship, and merchandising while paying players as little as possible. Even now, they use player names, photos, and footage to create implied endorsements by players of Federation sponsors and sponsor products the players do not use, while not paying the players. So, one of the reasons that we don't get this unrestricted look into American soccer, and that means the national teams, that means Major League Soccer, that means the USL, that means NISA, that means amateur soccer, anything that is involved with American soccer on officially sanctioned aspect of the American soccer landscape under the U.S. Soccer Federation. The reason why there's not a bright light shown has in part to do with this monopoly, this power given to the U.S. Soccer Federation. And they use it to wield influence over certain things, appearances for the national team. There have been players that have been blackballed in the past. You do what we say, you shut up and go along, or you're out. There have been players who have spoken their minds. There have been players that have stood up for what is right, and they have gotten shut out of the process. Compensation. Again, if you don't take what we're offering, then you're out. And you can't do anything about it. Treatment, as we're going to get into in just a minute. Again, be thankful for what we give you. This is the attitude of the Federation. Implied endorsements. We're going to take your name and your likeness, and we're going to use it, and we're going to make money off of it, and we're not going to give you any. Before Trinidad and Tobago, the U.S. men's national team were having issues with the Federation in regards to some of this implied endorsements. Not even being able to, get a cut off of their jersey sales. People are out buying their jerseys and they're not getting any money for it. And the Federation's acting like, well, they're only buying a jersey because it's just the U.S. men's national team jersey. They're not buying it because it has a certain player's name and number on the back. Where have you heard that argument before? Hint, 4 letters. NC. How's that going? Not very good. The U.S. men's national team and U.S. women's national team players have always received less than fair compensation when playing for the national teams. At the same time, every training session and game carries the risk of injury. For the past 40 years, the Federation fought individual player efforts to convince the Federation to pay fair compensation to the professional athletes who represent the United States in international competitions. To try to change that, in 1995, the U.S. men's national team players were the first United States national team in any sport to form a labor organization. The U.S. women's national team players followed a few years later. It took unfair labor practice charges filed by the U.S. men's national team players in a 1997 National Labor Relations Board action to force the Federation to even recognize and negotiate with the USNSTPA. Now, that date 1995 has some significance. I don't know if you remember this, but we had the World Cup in 1994, and I'm sure most of you remember that. What is significant about 1995? 1995 was Copa America, and the U.S. men's national team went to participate in Copa America. And there were some things that went on surrounding that in terms of treatment from the Federation, support from the Federation, compensation from the Federation, that was following this pattern. Take what we give you. If you're not willing to listen, then we're going to, do it our own way, or we're going to replace you guys at this and that and blah, blah, all these threats. Sunil Gulati was part of that. He was not the president at the time, but he was part of those conversations from the Federation to the men's national team players. And the men's national team players refused to budge. And anyway, it ended up leading to this formation here of the association. That backstory there is part of the color, part of why, in the reasons of the association even coming out with this, because it is personal experience. This stuff, even though it's been unfair and brought to light and in lawsuits from Hope Solo first, and then later with the U.S. women's national team about the equal pay, equal treatment situation, the unfair treatment and the monopolistic viewpoint of the Federation has been ongoing for a long time. It has affected both the men's and the women's national team players. And so it's important to go back and look at the history of this, the tendencies of the Federation. What is their normal operating procedures? How do they handle these moments? What is their culture? And it has been a culture of arrogance and power and threats, and has never been, and you talk to the national team players, especially if you talk to them off the record, where they don't feel the threat of retribution from the Federation. And if you talk to them in private, they will tell you some horrendous stories, and they will also just tell you how they felt no amount of support. I mean, I just want to stop before I go any further and to say this. Our women's national team has won and won and won. They've won the FIFA Women's World Cup. They have won the Olympics. They have won tournaments, cups, trophies. They are the most storied and successful women's national team on the face of the planet. And you would think that would garner support from the federation, that would lead to a feeling of these players that they feel like the federation has their back, that they are cheering for them, advocates of these ladies. And that could be, I mean, that is so far from the truth. It is absurd. Our women's national team has had success despite the lack of support from the federation, despite the threats from the federation, despite the conditions they have been placed in from the federation. It's no wonder, even though the public may not even know this, it is no wonder why so many fans support this U.S. women's national team. Yes, they win. They do win. And they do it despite the federation. But that's why these players play. They play for personal pride and they play for you. It's sad that we can't say they play for the federation, the members of the federation, because it's those members that they have to fight. Because the federation doesn't want to help them, doesn't want to give them the tools and resources they need. After the U.S. men's national team and U.S. women's national team organized in the late 1990s, a pattern developed that has continued for more than 20 years. This is decades. Patterns are seen over time. This isn't a one-off situation. This is very important for all of us to understand the behind the scenes here of how the federation really operates. Because the truth is, this is the federation's mindset and mentality. I've talked about this on the show before. What is the worldview of American soccer by the federation? What is their worldview of U.S. soccer? Their worldview is that we're in charge, we're going to do whatever we want, and whatever's most important to us is going to be what takes precedence, what gets preferential treatment, etc. And this monopoly power for the national team program granted under the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee is the same power and same fuel that the federation officials use in the way that they see the world, the way that they govern American soccer. The arrogance and feeling like they can do whatever they want, and you have to yield. You have to go along with what they say. This is a pattern that is ongoing. It is not just with the national team players. It is with others within the federation as well. It is not uncommon if you stand up against the federation to get blackballed. Same treatment that these players go through. With soccer's popularity in the United States continually rising, the only way for U.S. men's national team players to convince the federation to improve their wages and working conditions has been to come close to a work stoppage. In 1996, that meant the federation sending replacement players to play a friendly against Peru, and in 2005, that meant U.S. soccer calling up lower division replacement players to prepare for a World Cup qualifier against Mexico. Each time the players refused to be bullied, eventually securing improved compensation and working conditions. The federation norm is forcing players to play under expired collective bargaining agreements, sometimes for over 2 years. Historically, the federation has justified its unreasonable proposals by claiming its financial future was uncertain. Where does that come from? What does that sound like? It sounds like Major League Soccer, right? It sounds like Don Garber negotiating. Oh man, we're poor. We got no money. Every team, man's losing money. Now, he doesn't talk like a Southerner, but you get my point, right? Every team's losing money. Nothing's going well. The sky is falling. We can't afford to do anything else. And Arthur Blank recently comes out and goes, man, we're making money. Like, most of us are making money. There's only a couple that aren't, but, like, we're all making money. We're good. We need to do more. Completely opposite to what Don Garber said, right? This is the same. And Don Garber, why did I bring up Don Garber? Well, Don Garber is the CEO of Soccer United Marketing. He is the commissioner of Major League Soccer, and he's a board member of the U.S. Soccer Federation, which I still think is crazy that you're paying a board member millions of dollars through his other day jobs, and then he gets to sit on the very board that makes decisions and have influence over those decisions of money in his back pocket. MLS does the same thing the Federation does. They're hand in hand. They work together on this stuff. By claiming that its financial future is uncertain, or it's poor, or it's not going well, they cry poor. The Federation still claims it cannot afford the players a fair share of the Federation's revenue from selling the efforts of those players to fans, sponsors, and television. The U.S. men's national team players stood together and eventually negotiated substantial increases with the Federation in 97, 2001, 05, and 2011. As a result, player compensation increased. However, it never came close to a fair percentage of the Federation's national team revenues. The U.S. women normally negotiated after the men, with our unions working together since 1999. The goal was always to secure for the women comparable gains in pay and working conditions. For more than 20 years, the Federation has resisted any concept of equal pay or basic economic fairness for the U.S. women's national team players. Historically, the Federation also refused to include the women's CBA in the women's CBA, the same provisions as the men's with respect to air travel, hotels, etc. This is systematic gender discrimination that should have never happened. Now, Hope Solo was on my show about 9 months ago or so, 8 months ago, and she spoke about some of this, the conditions that they had to deal with. It's not just that the men are flying first class or chartered flights and the women are flying coach. It's not just that the men are staying in 5-star hotels and the women are staying in 2.5, 3-star hotels. It's also other aspects. That's a culture. Even where the men would train before matches compared to the women, it was not uncommon for women to train in a park or at a high school, and men are training at college campuses or professional stadiums. I remember hearing stories a couple years ago of the current and former president and other members of the board, and the way that they talked about the women's national team. It's like, they're women. Like, they should be thankful for what we give them. It was this kind of like arrogance. Like, no, we're not. I mean, we're not giving them as much as the men. It's women's soccer. Like, this is the attitude. And when I heard about those kind of comments being thrown around the table, it backs up what we're seeing here in the way the women have been discussed, the way they've been talked about. Is when you hear, you know, kind of backroom talk, or you hear about backroom talk, it lines up with what we see here. It's frustrating. It's wrong. The current U.S. women's national team dispute relates to the agreement of the USNSTPA negotiated on behalf of the men in 2011 for the years 2011 through 2018. From 2003 to 2010, the Federation's revenues related to the men's national team and sponsorship of that team had increased significantly. The U.S. men's national team players were due for dramatic compensation increases. The men's 2011 through 2018 deal was negotiated just at the end of the country's financial crisis, with the Federation claiming its economic future was uncertain. Given the Federation's claimed fear of financial uncertainty in 2011, the U.S. men's national team players agreed that during the 8 years of the new CBA, 2011 through 18, player compensation would only increase by 25%, a rate of just about 2.8% per year. As it turns out, 2011 through 18 were spectacular years of financial growth and prosperity for the Federation, while U.S. men's national team player compensation went up 25% over those 8 years. The Federation's revenue tripled. In 2009 and 10, the years with financial information available to the U.S. men's national team players when negotiating the 2011 through 18 deal, the Federation reported annual cash sponsorship, television, and licensing revenue of about $16 million. Total men's and women's national team game revenue was about $12 million annually. The Federation had just over $50 million in the bank to cover any losses if the economy did not recover. So as of 2011, when the men executed their CBA, the Federation received $28 million in annual cash revenue related to the men's and women's national teams, with just over $50 million in the bank. By 2017, when the U.S. women's national team players were conducting their most recent CBA negotiations, the Federation's annual sponsorship, television, and licensing revenue $16 million in 2011 to over $49 million. Annual national team revenues at that time ranged from $29 to $55 million. The Federation had $168 million of net assets. The annual combined revenue related to the men's and women's national teams had increased to between $78 and $104 million, with over $168 million in the bank. Once again, both national team revenues and Federation assets in reserve had tripled. With the women going first, negotiating a new deal in 2017, the expectation was for dramatic increases in their compensation, comparable to the Federation's triple-digit increases in revenue. Instead, the women's 2017 through 21 CBA did not bring the women equality in working conditions, and the women did not benefit from the dramatic increase in revenue associated with the U.S. women's national team. In fact, in 2017, the Federation insisted the women sign a 2017 through 21 deal that was worse financially than the men's soon-to-expire 2011 through 18 CBA that had been negotiated 6 years earlier. The equal pay dispute filed by members of the women's national team and set for trial in the spring compares the women's 2017 through 21 deal with the expired men's CBA negotiated in 2011. The correct comparison should be between what the women got with their 27-21 deal and triple what the Federation agreed to pay the men in 2011, or whatever the men negotiate in their new CBA that will be retroactive to January 1st, 2019. Those comparisons are what make it clear that the Federation had no intention of compensating the women fairly. This is a trend, or as this press release states, a pattern. Which brings us to the real issue here. Our view is as follows. Yes, the women's 2017 through 2021 deal is worse than the men's 2011 through 18 deal. Yes, the Federation continues to discriminate against the women in their wages and working conditions. We understand why the Federation's control not only over the U.S. women's national team, but also over the only women's professional league in the United States, the NWSL, might have created tremendous pressure on the U.S. women's national team players to get a deal done, even if it was on completely unfair and discriminatory terms. Faced with a monopolist controlling their two primary potential employers and aware that a work stoppage could destroy the third effort at a women's professional soccer league in the United States, it is our view that the women had no reasonable alternative but to accept the 2017 through 21 terms the Federation demanded. What we believe should happen is simple. Pay the women significantly more than our recently expired men's deal. In our estimation, the women were due at least triple what our expired deal was worth in player compensation. We believe the federation should have agreed to a deal directly tied to a fair share of the revenue players generate. That is what should have happened, based on the entire history of labor negotiations involving the men and women players and the federation. Now, the federation is taking the frivolous position that the U.S. men's national team players' compensation should also stay at those 2011 through 18 numbers. This is not because there is any basis for that position. Instead, it's a desperate attempt to cover up the fact that what they did to the women in 2017 is indefensible. Has the new leadership of the federation simply admitted that what the former leadership did was wrong? Have they offered to negotiate a new fair deal with the U.S. women's national team representatives? Of course not. Instead, the federation has doubled down on its misconduct. Rather than promote the sport of soccer in positive ways, they are involved in constant disputes and litigation. Rather than share the massive surpluses the women help generate with the players, they are using those funds to dramatically increase the federation's annual legal fee budget to over $10 million to try to impose massive legal fees the women cannot afford. They're lobbying and using every legal trick in the book to try to distract Congress, the judge, and the soon-to-be impaneled jury. With that mindset, the multiple litigations involving the U.S. Soccer Federation are no surprise. They're trying to protect their monopoly, their massive revenue streams, and their continued ability to exploit U.S. national team players. And I know this is U.S. national team specific, but I want to go and add something here in parentheses. This is me adding in parentheses after the statement. They're trying to protect their monopoly, their massive revenue streams, and their continued ability to exploit U.S. national team players. And I'm going to put in parentheses, and the rest of American soccer. If you are not their chosen, they will leverage and exploit you for their own gain. And in the eyes of the federation, that gain typically involves Major League Soccer. Everyone has been dealing with this monopolist mentality, and it's got to change. It is ridiculous. It is unfair. And I hope that members of Congress are paying attention to what is really going on here from a labor relations standpoint. Not just with the national team players, the way that this federation is allowed to do what it's doing. Its rules are set up in a way to protect the monopoly. They have built for themselves a palace and a kingdom, and they are doing everything in their power to protect it. It is time for this to stop. The courts, juries, the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, Congress, new federation leadership, or a combination of all five need to reform the federation. The exploitation of athletes to generate revenues that are siphoned off to benefit owners of for-profit leagues and teams, federation personnel with massive above-market salaries and bonuses, and self-promoting all expenses paid federation volunteers must end. Volunteers are in quotations. The practice of paying multi-million-dollar bonuses to personnel associated with the federation for running various federation-controlled tournaments in the United States should be investigated and outlawed. Soccer is perhaps the most corrupt sport in the world. We do not want a U.S. Soccer Federation that behaves like FIFA, and yet they do. Think about what they just pointed out. This has been ongoing. It's something we've talked about on the show many times. It is frustrating. The federation uses all kinds of tricks. Sunil Gulati in the 2008 presidential election, he was not running, but he was running around trying to, have his say on everything as he was outgoing. And he would talk about, the presidential position should not be a paid position. It should be volunteer. That's a lie. It's not volunteer. He was the president of the federation that gave sanctioning to Major League Soccer, which then gave him a paycheck. How's that a volunteer? He was on Bob Kraft's payroll while president of U.S. Soccer. Bob Kraft of the New England Revolution of Major League Soccer. Tell me how that is a volunteer position. Tell me that does not give you a major conflict of interest in leading the federation for all. These guys paying themselves multi-million-dollar bonuses for running a tournament. Cuts. They'll act like they're volunteers on the board, and then they'll turn around and get giant bonuses for other work. They go around and they travel the world on the Federation's dime. Laughing it up, eating it up, staying in the nicest hotels, flying in the nicest class of flight, first class and et cetera, et cetera. They're living like kings. The U.S. Soccer Federation should be investigated. We need Congress to dig in. I think the Ted Stevens Act needs to go farther in creating regulations on these federations, requirements and transparency on these regulations, on these federations. Excuse me. What can you do? This is to the public. What can you do? Tell the Federation sponsors you will not support them until the Federation starts doing the right thing and gives the women a new CBA that pays a fair share of the gate, receipts, and that television and sponsorship revenue to the players. Write to your congressional representatives and tell them it is time to reform the Federation. Let the Federation know that you do not believe the false narrative they are circulating. Support the players, not the Federation. Thank you to the U.S. National Team Players Association for coming out and saying what needed to be said. It should have happened a long time ago. We appreciate it. Seriously, though, thank you for all of that, because there was so much there. We didn't even, get a chance to really unpack everything. And it was just, it was a really good press release. I am very appreciative of that, and they are right. We need major reforms to get things going in the right direction. Our sponsor this half hour is Charity Water. If you have not had a moment to go to charitywater.org, do that today. You can help provide clean drinking water to people all over the world and be a part of that story by going to charitywater.org today. We'll be right back after this.
No one, no man, no woman, no child should ever have to drink green water with bugs, with algae, with disease in it. Bad water and a lack of toilets kills more people than all the wars in the world. We know how to bring clean drinking water right now to every single person on earth. And when you can bring water into communities, it truly transforms them. It changes everything. Or you could know that you'd made a difference. You could know that you had truly impacted the life of a family, of a community, of a region. There was either clean water or there wasn't. We believe in a world where every single person has clean and safe water to drink, and we will continue fighting until that happens.
Thanks for watching. It'll be a busy weekend and busy next week. We'll be in Nashville later today through the AGM, and then from there heading over to Berlin to cover the Laureate Sports Awards. We're still sorting out some details for Monday's show. It might be a live from the red carpet or from the media center of the Laureate Sports Awards, so we're still sorting some of that out as well, but stay tuned for that. Then later in the week, Tuesday, beginning Tuesday, we'll be in Amsterdam for a few days and look forward to trying to bring you some content from there as well. So busy next 8 days or so as we head to Nashville, then to Berlin, and then on to Amsterdam before getting back next week. So stay tuned to the show. Really appreciate the support. Everybody watching on Bega TV as well as on DanielWorkman.com. And you can catch me on Twitter or Instagram at Daniel Workman. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great day. See everyone again tomorrow.